Those people who have just arrived, welcome to the TCCI 2012 Business Expo. As we said at the start of the Expo this morning, it's all about taking away from here some new knowledge about how you can run your businesses properly and also how you can also be as responsible as possible as well in our community. Our next presenter is a person who we've actually known each other for a number of years, and we've crossed paths in various forums as well. But our next presenter is the CEO of NRM North. He's also on the Economic Development Plan Reference Group, and James is also chair of the Launceston Airport Aviation Group. He's also got a small business background, and at one stage in his life he attended the Mount Eliza Business School as well in Melbourne, and also spent some time working in Queensland. Just to give you a bit of a quick overview about what NRM North is all about. That's one of three NRMs that exist in Tasmania. There's also NRM South and NRM Cradle Coast. And they're responsible for the planning, delivery and implementation of integrated natural resource management. The goal is ensuring that the use of our natural resources maximises environmental issues as well as economic outcomes. An enormously important part of our economy. We are pleased to make welcome the Chief Executive Officer for NRM North, James McKee. And also, just once again, like our previous speakers as well, just be prepared for questions at the end. That'd be great.
Thanks, Steve. Oh, thank you for having me. And this is a topic which, and I just think I can see a spelling mistake, so I'm going to skip to the next slide. It's a topic which I think is sometimes underdone because of its economic consequences as much as what people normally think about, and that is the environmental outcomes. As Steve said, I've come from a small business background myself in a couple of instances, and I guess marrying that interest and that background with my interest in sustainability is why I'm doing what I'm doing. NRM North, as Steve said, we exist under an Act, but we're an independent organisation, and one of our goals is not just environmental outcomes, it's the triple bottom line. So it is truly about getting environmental as well as economic and good social outcomes. And so the question for us is, how do we help get good economic outcomes? And in this context, working with business. One of the things, and I'll come to the slide that's there in a moment, but one of the things we have been doing is working, and in my case, working in the north with the local councils, in particular Launceston City Council, with the local Chamber of Commerce, Launceston Chamber of Commerce, and we were supported by TCCI and with City Prom, which is the local inner city business organisation, along with the university and the Examiner newspaper, and we actually developed a program called Eco Smart Biz. And the whole purpose of that program was about helping drive that triple bottom line, and the Launceston Chamber of Commerce was one of the key drivers of it. And so I'll come to some examples out of that a little later on, but I just wanted to give you a flavour that this is truly about trying to drive that triple bottom line. So what is sustainability? It's a word that gets bandied around rather regularly, and most people who bandy it around have no idea what it's all about. Well, there is a definition, and this is the official definition. Sustainability is about development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. Some people would argue that's an impossibility. You start using resources now. But it's the ethos, the philosophy of that, really that drives sustainability in the real world, and that is, how do we minimise our impact without compromising what we need at the present, so that we minimise the impact on the future. And that really is the definition of sustainability. And sustainable businesses aren't just about driving it into the ground and getting a whole bunch of environmental outcomes. It is about creating that triple bottom line, about being careful about the resources we use so there is an environmental outcome, a good, careful thought about our natural resources. It's about making sure there is a social outcome, and it's also about financial wealth creation. So the true definition of sustainability includes all three. So why should business owners, small and large, think about it? and get involved in this issue of sustainability? Well, one is the values question. It's the right thing to do. Once upon a time, that certainly wasn't a key driver. People didn't think greatly about that. The right thing to do was to employ lots of people and to grow lots and get big and all of those sort of things. Increasingly, sustainability, that true definition of sustainability, is being driven by values. And not just by values by business owners, although that is a lot of it, but by values from consumers. So increasingly, many of you who are in business probably already seeing it, increasingly the demand on businesses is consumers wanting business and the people that they buy product from to demonstrate that they're doing the right thing. Now, doing the right thing is a very vague statement, and that can mean all sorts of things to all sorts of people. But take it for what it's worth. It's one of the drivers and one of the reasons why people should get involved in sustainability. There is obviously also the more altruistic bit of that, and that is looking after a finite resource for future generations is one of those core values. Obviously, sustainability, there's an increasing, and some would argue, unbearable red tape burden of compliance on issues related to sustainability. But they're the things you must do. They're expectations of society. And so sustainability, as consumers and as society increases their expectations, governments respond by requiring more compliance. So there are things that we must do. But I want to focus a little bit today on the competitive advantage of sustainability, because there are some very real competitive advantages. And that's the things you can do to make money out of sustainability. It sounds a little crass because when we talk about sustainability, we often think about the values bit, but there is that side to it. This is an interesting chart because it shows across a time frame some of the shift in that sentiment, both by business itself and that is being driven by consumers. So starting in the pre-1970s, it's pretty much a free-for-all. Very little compliance, very little regulation, very little thought about waste and pollution. It was very much a fringe exercise, if at all. Then there was, in the 1970s, a much more reactive type approach, which was about pollution control, a recognition that it was an issue, and increasing regulation legislation, which drove compliance. And it was really about controlling pollution. What do you do with pollution? And that sort of in the 1980s has moved towards pollution prevention. So they're going, well, if we've got to control it, let's actually minimise what we have to control. Let's start preventing it. Moving into the 1990s, and a recognition that there was a liability and risk attached to particularly the issue of pollution. And so environmental management systems and all the consultants that go with environmental management systems came to life and have become an industry in themselves. Towards the late 1990s, there was much more of this anticipatory type approach. And the issue of product stewardship, where does a product come from and is it being developed responsibly? Designing for the environment, life cycle assessments, all those sort of things have become a core part of business and business thinking. And then into the 2000s, this issue of environmental cost accounting, because suddenly we woke up to the realisation that if we're going to be using natural resources, water, energy, soil, whatever it is, they are finite resources ultimately, and we need to actually make sure there's some costing of that finite resource in the end product. So we're not just mining things and not accounting for that cost. And so there became much more of an integrated management system around this. How do you build in environmental costs? And then moving into this whole idea of eco-efficiency and design for sustainability. This is a different way of saying similar thing, except for I think this speaks more to the business itself, and that is, again, starting down at compliance level, moving along to baseline positions, so what are we using, how do we understand what we're using, getting some efficiency gains and improvements over our use of resources, doing some strategic thinking, that continual improvement cycle. Then moving what I think is into the area we're starting to move now, and that's strategic innovation and market advantages. So making sure that if we're in this sustainability game, whatever business we're in, that we're actually finding out what the competitive advantage, our market advantage is that we can use. So it's no longer just an altruistic exercise, it actually becomes about using that responsible approach to resource use as a market advantage. And ultimately, positioning and maintaining businesses and their viability around the dividends, the environmental, social dividends, as well as the economic that it provides both to the business but also to the community at large. And so you can see the journey, and we're still very much in this space here. I think one of the interesting things for me is reading Harvard Business Review occasionally is this new push to what they call a new capitalism, which is about instead of just using resources and producing something someone wants, actually producing sustainability products which actually are sustainable in their own right as a capitalistic venture. And I'll leave you to look that up, but it's certainly the push that's happening around the world. So how does this issue of sustainability help? Well, corporate social responsibility. It comes down to what are the expectations of the community on your business, and particularly because they usually are your consumers as well, what are their expectations in terms of your responsibility back to the community you work and live in. This has been proven, and increasingly with Gen Y, improves staff morale and retention. I know it's tempting, they say builders' houses are never finished or mechanics' cars are never fixed. And it's often, as an organisation that deals in natural resource management, to be busy worrying about everybody else's sustainability and not to be worried about our own. And yet we proved in our own organisation that taking this seriously, doing little things, actually makes particularly the younger generation feel good about the organisation. And there is some actual really good evidence out there that it does help. Sustainability is an industry in itself, and it has its own networks which are as much about innovation as they are about the environmental aspects. Recognition. Interesting example for us was Daisy Fresh Dry Cleaners in Launceston, who won the EcoSmart Biz Environmental Award one year. Had it plastered all over their vans, all over their doors, and had a demonstrable increase in their business as a result of the branding, the recognised branding. And again, there's some excellent evidence that this is the case. But the interesting thing with recognition is that it works to a point in terms of market advantage, and then it just becomes expectation. And I think that's where, in some ways, we're moving to, is beyond just the premium market, the green market, and moving much more into responding to actual demand. And so it becomes much more about market access than just about competitive advantage. Appealing to new customers, and there's a growing customer base out there that is looking for green products that can demonstrably prove that they are sustainable. There is some possible competitive advantages, but as I said, I think the market access and the market appeal is where we're headed. As the expectations grow, for a business to actually compete in the market and have access to consumers, they will increasingly need to demonstrate sustainability in one way, shape or form. The interesting thing is the evidence is starting to show that greenwashing is pretty much over. The days of being able to just put up an ambered claim by a business are rapidly disappearing, and the predictions are that in the next 5 to 10 years, consumers will increasingly demand some form of evidence. So that's worth thinking about. But increased profit, and we'll come to that in a moment because it is a very real thing. I think this is actually, and this is really where, when on that graph that went up this way, this is really where I think progressive businesses need to be thinking. And it's that, what I call new capitalism. Innovation and new business opportunities which are not just about taking a product and turning it into something to sell in the market. It's about going, well, if this is the market, if people in the market are looking for sustainable products, then how do I actually, can I use my innovation and develop some new opportunities which actually are about selling that? And I'm not just talking about developing a consultancy to help other businesses. An interesting example, again, coming out of India, is businesses that are making a great deal of profit by developing sustainable housing, replacing slums. Now, huge social benefits, huge environmental benefits, but they're making money out of it, not because they're developing a grand capitalistic venture, but they're basing it on a sustainability concept. And I think that's certainly a great opportunity for the future. So what's the premise that we're operating on with sustainability and business? Well, it's quite simple, isn't it? Inputs, a whole bunch of stuff goes on in the business, and you end up with a bunch of outputs. Most inputs, other than human capital and human effort, revolve around material inputs such as, and most of them come out of our natural resource base, whether it's water, energy, or some other product, ultimately comes as a result of our natural resources. Let me put it to you a different way, and I think this is fairly commonly accepted as a way of thinking, particularly in supply chain logic. Cost savings versus increased income. And so one of the cases for sustainability is about reducing costs. And so if you're working on a 5% margin in your business, if you can make $1,000 worth of saving, then you've actually decreased your need to sell another $20,000 worth of product. Does that make sense to people? It's pretty common logic. So if you then take you can't do much about these things, but if you just take your inputs and you put and you, again, working on a 5% margin, and you can make a 3% saving by reducing your water and energy costs and possibly some of your waste costs, and you're, for example, turning over, let's say, quite a small business, $50,000, total business costs $50,000, your total input costs at 56% being about $28,000. If you can make a 3% saving, and in Launceston on the Eco Smart Biz program, that's about what these size businesses were saving, about $800, bit over $800 per year, then that's equivalent to a sales equivalent, based on that 5% margin, of about $16,000. If you don't believe me, go away, Google it, do maths. It actually adds up. And that's quite astounding when you think about it. For that $840, that business would have had to generate $16,000 odd extra business at a 5% margin to actually deliver that to their business. So just in managing their water and their waste with some pretty simple processes, very cost efficient, they managed to actually save that money and in the process do some other wonderful things as well. So you can see that there is a very real business case for sustainability. Now obviously it's a diminishing return, you can only save so much, you need to spend to actually increase your revenue, so it's not quite as rosy a picture as this graph on its own says, but this is a very real business case for why sustainability should be taken seriously. I thought I'd be a bit practical today, so rather than just talking in theory, is give you a bit of a sense of the sorts of things a business could do fairly simply to look at this issue. The really interesting ones for most businesses and the big opportunities are around energy and water and waste, and also purchase of materials. So this is a spreadsheet out of a similar program to Eco Smart Biz. It's one that's run in Queensland called Eco Biz, and this is simply a spreadsheet, nothing more, with a few pretty colours on it. And in it, it's simply a matter of going through and working out what your inputs are from water, energy, materials, and the page goes down. I can't show you the down page, but goes through pretty much all bits of the business and work out what are your actual inputs. Describes them, describes the units, the quantity, and then attributes a cost to those. Pretty fundamental, just as simple, and yet it surprises me how few businesses actually do this with their basic inputs. They just pay the bills and don't think too much more about it, and we certainly found that in the Eco Smart Biz program. Out of that process comes a baseline report, and anyone can do this in a spreadsheet. There are a myriad of tools on the internet. I'm not going to stand here and promote a particular organisation, but you'll find these tools on the internet, or you can easily get hold of an organisation that will help you with it. This becomes very powerful for people, and we found this in the program in Launceston, because you start to realise the real input costs and where the real opportunities for savings are. And so you've gone through the inventory. The other thing to do is, once you've understood what the actual costs are to the business, is to then marry that up with an actual inventory. And again, it surprised me, out of the 65 baseline businesses that we did in Launceston, how few had actually just simply gone through their business and gone, we know what we've got. We know how many fluoro bulbs we've got. We know how many fridges we've got. We know all those things. They were just there as part, and it accumulated as part of the business. And again, it's surprising how much just doing an inventory can twig ideas, very simple ideas. One interesting example, and actually this was a TCCI example, which was they simply went through and found one fridge that was basically unused. It had some cans of soda or something in it. There was two fridges. One was being totally underutilised. They got rid of that fridge and could demonstrably demonstrate the cost benefit as well as the environmental benefit of removing a fridge out of their office. As simple as that sometimes. But the inventory is a critical part of that. And then it's about, well, what do I do? So if I know what my water use is, I know what the cost is, I've done my inventory, I've done my costings, then I can actually work out what's possible here. Can I reduce my water use? Is there wastage in the system? Pretty basic, simple stuff. And yet, for most business owners, it's not what they do. They pay the bills and don't think much more about some of these particular issues. And so, in reality, sustainability is quite a simple concept. And it's a concept that can be easily applied. Again, this is just one example of the sorts of outputs that you can do from a simple spreadsheeting process. Let me give you some case studies to show you what is actually possible. This business was an aquaculture business, and aquaculture uses a lot of water, and they implemented at a reasonable cost, about a bit over $200,000, a whole system to reuse and purify water, and had some on-site water storage put in. $200,000, not a massive investment, but significant. And then they used gravity in terms of reducing their power costs. So they forked out about $230,000 to do this project. In the process, they're saving themselves about $74,000. Their payback period is somewhere between 3 and 4 years, depending on, well, probably less now, given the way electricity prices are going. And so their gravity feed was a masterstroke. They can also demonstrate their water savings, their energy savings, and their reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Let me give you another one. This is a steam laundry. Again, focusing on water efficiency and saving and use of chemicals, which is a wonderful thing for them to be able to talk about. Again, a fairly significant input cost, but $127,000 of annual savings, payback period of somewhere between 4 and 5 years, and some fairly massive greenhouse gas emission savings. Here's an interesting one. This one's a mainland one, makes ice cream sticks, those sort of things. They changed two things, their saw blades and their drying operations, And again, a reasonable outlay of investment, but you can see again a significant payback period, 1.4, not very long payback period, 1.4 years with annual savings of 83,000. Again, some significant environmental figures in the process. So I think you can see from that that they were bigger businesses. A business that has the capacity to invest in sustainability can get some serious long-term benefits, as well as being able to promote it. This was a study of 64 businesses, small businesses, everything from probably about the $50,000 turnover to a couple of $1 million in Launceston. The individual annual savings were around that $840 a year. Doesn't sound like a huge financial saving. But let me point out two things. None of this involved major investment. It was simply doing some simple things like de-lamping, getting rid of a fridge, changing when the cars were due to change over, changing to a different type of car. They were pretty much just doing things that were within their current capacity to do with virtually no extra outlay. And as a result, they saved $842 each. Now, you go back to my previous slide, that's significant because that's $16,000 worth of extra revenue they don't have to generate to get that saving. But I think probably more importantly for a lot of them, that's the difference between a holiday and slogging it out. And so it actually has social consequences as well. But we're also able to promote for these businesses, again with minimal outlay, minimal effort, some significant water savings, significant waste savings, and also some significant greenhouse gas reductions. And one of the opportunities as this sort of grows is to increasingly work with local government and other players so that this is recognised in other ways, in very real ways. For example, with waste savings, some sort of recognition that the fact that businesses are saving waste means that less is going into the landfill, which is a good environmental outcome, but that means less cost for councils as well. So as we start to grow some of these and start to understand these figures on a broader scale, there will be other opportunities to interact and actually to provide incentives to businesses that truly do engage in sustainability. So the question is, for a small business or a larger business, where do you start with this whole game? Well, most savings will come from finding ways to reduce water, and in water's case often to recycle, energy and waste. They're pretty much the three big inputs that are easy to actually do something about, and often the ones that are overlooked. Reducing and recycling water can be as simple as changing washers in a tap, and I should say we did a Eco Smart Biz, ran this program at the Australian Maritime College, so it's also been run in a very large institution as well. And the interesting thing with the Australian Maritime College was it came down to things as simple as de-lamping their fluoro lights, changing their washers in taps, and some really, really simple basic things, and the figures are fairly massive. Energy, understanding what's going on in the energy in the business is a critical thing, and often not well understood, and making some simple changes to efficiency in energy use. And with waste, recycling, and look, fundamentally using less materials, thinking carefully about the materials that are being used. So if we're going to talk about sustainability in a business context, what are the keys to success? Well, it has to be a commitment, ultimately. Without a commitment to it, it just won't happen. Staff are critical to this process, and I think this has been proven time and time again. Greenwashing doesn't cut any longer. It needs to actually be an engagement process within the business itself. Measure, change, and measure again. Understanding what's going on is critical to be able to demonstrate sustainability. Doing it for more than just money. If it's just done for money alone, even though that's obviously a key driver for businesses, then people will see that for what it's worth. There are much more reasons than just money. Think strategically. Where could this take my business? I'm not just doing this because I can make an extra buck. actually I need to think about where can this sustainability agenda really take my business, because it could take it somewhere. And that's about finding the competitive advantage. In my particular business, whether it's a local corner store, whether it's a manufacturing business, whether it's a consultancy, what's the competitive advantage in my sector that sustainability will give me, and the innovation opportunities? So why take it seriously? You can tell I'm reasonably passionate about this, and I think it's for a whole bunch of reasons. It does, and again, the evidence is there, it helps attract and retain quality employees. There are some wonderful studies around that show that increasingly, particularly Gen Y and the bottom end of Gen X, are increasingly putting this up as one of their requirements when they go to interview you for their job. One of the things they want to know is this organisation sustainable, and can you demonstrate it? And if you can say yes and you can demonstrate it, then the chance of retaining them, attracting and retaining, is much higher. Reduces operating costs, improve the bottom line. I think we've hammered that one as an important. Improving brand appeal improving brand and appeal. Reducing risk and exposure, and I think this is one that's often under talked about actually. Part of that risk is about the market and where the market wants to go. So making sure that minimise the risk in terms of missing out on the market. But I think it's also about the less dependent you are on resources and resource inputs, then you've also increased your adaptability, and particularly with rising energy costs, if you're already in the space of actually constantly monitoring that and reducing it, then you're reducing your risk and exposure to those external forces. And you're minimising your impact on the environment, on the things that actually matter to all of us for future generations. So the old slogan, just do something. It sounds, and I know plenty of businesses came to us and said, it's just too hard, I haven't got the time, I just can't engage in sustainability. So we've made it our slogan, just do something. Spend 10 minutes thinking about, is that one fridge too many? Could you do something? Do you need that many lights? Start simple. Grab the low-hanging fruit, one too many fridges. Measure and monitor. Become a habit of, as well as measuring and monitoring your cash flows, add an extra balance sheet or a cash flow to measure and monitor your basic inputs, outputs. And keep it simple. Don't make it difficult. Involve staff, and if you're a family business, family, because buy-in is everything. And find a credible source of help or support. There's plenty of businesses out there and consultants that'll take your money to help you if you want to go down that track, but there's also plenty of organisations that will, certainly the Department of Economic Development's interested in this sort of thing, but a credible source of help or support is a wonderful thing to help mentor you through the process. And we've got plenty of time left for any questions. Thank you.
Just one comment, James. I'm writing my notes in a plastic biro, but when it runs out, the whole thing will be thrown out. I mean, there must be lots of contributors to happen to that things where you actually have a much more sustainable product.
Wonderful example. So the example was when the biro runs out, in the bin. Has anyone thought about that? I mean, it only costs a few cents, but you put it out across an organisation. And I'll give you the example we do. All of our biros, we buy expensive biros and refills. Simple. And again, we can demonstrate an actual return on that investment, but we're doing the right thing and minimising the number of biros and bins. Yeah, great example. No? Oh, sorry, I thought the hand up. Yeah.
That's one thing that I and a bunch of my friends are dealing with. I'm a jeweller and I use mostly recycled materials, and I'm part of a group of other jewellers and makers who increasingly are finding ways to use things like old vaulted pens, used glass balls, all sorts of stuff. So that's very important.
For the sake of everyone else, I'll quickly repeat that. So we have a jeweller, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, who does makes jewellery out of old materials, recycles old materials, including pens by the sound of it, which is interesting. I think that's a wonderful example of what I was talking about sustainability as an innovation opportunity, where people increasingly are not demanding, they're actually increasingly looking for personal items which actually have character about them because they're recycled. And I think, so it's not actually recycling because it's a good sustainability initiative, it's actually a business opportunity in itself, yeah. And growing, absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that wonderful example. Yeah. It looks like it, Steve.
James, that was absolutely fascinating. I said at the start, if we can walk away with one idea, that'd be great, mate. I think we've got dozens of ideas from what you mentioned there. I think we should put our hands together. Wasn't that interesting? Did you find that interesting? Well done. Good on you, James. Thank you very much indeed. James McKee, the CEO of NRM North. James obviously will be around for a little while longer, so if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask James about individually about your business or whatever, please ask James. But very interesting indeed. It's amazing what you can do in the workplace, isn't it, to make a difference. And as I mentioned at the start there's also NRM South operating down here in Hobart, and there's also NRM Cradle Coast operating on the northwest coast. So the good thing is that we've got NRMs operating throughout the state, which is terrific. So James, thank you very much for joining us today. And James, of course, will be talking once again in Launceston tomorrow as well. I know from just a little bit of experience about the Eco Smart Biz program that was run. Very successful program. So I encourage all of you to take a bit of research on that. Google it, have a look on the internet and just find out a few things that happened there. Go to the NRM websites and have a look, because there's plenty of information that you can glean from NRM and what it can do in our community and what it can do for your business. We're going to take a break now. There's going to be lunch. We'll be very shortly, and then we'll return with more speakers this afternoon, where we're going to talk about marketing and communications. We're going to talk about social media as well. So plenty more to come this afternoon at the 2012 TCCI Business Expo. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Look forward to you being back this afternoon. Thank you.